I was standing on my front porch in the middle of a June downpour in Savannah when I held out my black umbrella to the woman standing in front of me, soaking wet. She was my neighbor. She didn't take it right away. She looked at me, not at the umbrella, at me, rain running down her face, her hair sticking to her neck, and she said something I still hear 3 years later. "Can you take me home?" At the time, I thought she just needed someone to walk her through the rain. I didn't know she'd been waiting 2 years just to say that sentence. And the umbrella in my hand, it was never really about the rain. My name is Caleb Ashford. I'm 38 years old, and I restore antique furniture for a living. Mostly tables, chairs, dressers, things other people are ready to throw away because they can't see past the water damage and the chipped veneer. I take them apart, strip them down, rebuild them into something worth keeping. I've been doing it long enough that my hands know the grain of a piece of wood before my eyes do. It's the kind of work that doesn't require conversation, which suits me fine. I live alone in a colonial-style house on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. I bought the place after my divorce, when all I wanted was somewhere quiet where my hands could stay busy so my mind didn't have to be. The house had good bones, wide plank floors, a wraparound porch with white railings, and a workshop out back with a tin roof that drummed every time it rained. I planted hydrangeas along the front fence because the soil was right for them, and let the rest of the yard take care of itself. My ex-wife's name is Dana. We were married for 6 years, no kids. It didn't end because of infidelity or some dramatic blow-up. It ended because Dana wanted a different version of me, one who talked more at dinner parties, who had career ambitions beyond sanding oak in a shed, who could show up at her corporate events without looking like he'd rather be somewhere else. She used to say I was like a house with all the lights off solid, but nobody seemed to be home. I don't hate Dana. I just wasn't loud enough for her, and she wasn't quiet enough for me. We signed the papers on a Tuesday, shook hands in a parking lot, and that was that. Clean, civilized. The kind of ending that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves a hollow place where something used to be. I moved out of the house we'd shared in Atlanta, drove south with a truck full of woodworking tools and not much else, and found the Savannah house on a listing that nobody else wanted. The porch was sagging, the kitchen cabinets were warped from humidity, and the workshop had a family of raccoons living in it. I spent the first 6 months fixing things, replacing boards, rewiring outlets, patching the roof. It was honest work, the kind of work where you can see progress at the end of every day, which is more than I could say for most things in my life at that point. After the divorce, I built a life that fit like a well-worn glove. I woke up early, made black coffee, sat on the porch and watched the street come alive, sprinklers clicking on, a dog barking 3 blocks over, the mail truck rattling past. Then I walked to my workshop, turned on the ceiling fan, and worked until the light got thin. Neighbors knew me as the quiet man who fixed things, the one who waved but never lingered. I wasn't lonely, at least that's what I told myself. I was just used to being alone. Clara Whitfield lived 3 houses down. 35, taught high school English. She'd moved in about 2 years before this story begins. She lived alone, walked every morning, and sometimes stopped at my fence to look at the hydrangeas. We had short conversations over the fence about weather, about fertilizer, about nothing that cut too deep. Clara never asked why I lived alone. She never glanced at the ring tan line on my hand. I liked that about her. She let silence be silence. The black umbrella, I should tell you about it. It wasn't expensive. Just a fold-up with a curved handle that I kept on a hook by the front door because Savannah rains come fast and hard. It became one of those small, unremarkable constants in my life. Like the coffee, like the creak of the third porch step. Looking back now, I realize Clara walked past my house at the same time every morning, the exact window, when I was on the porch with my coffee. I told myself it was coincidence. It wasn't. I'm the kind of man you'd pass in a grocery store and not remember. Clara was the kind of woman you didn't notice until she was gone, and then the room felt emptier than it should. It was a Thursday in June when the rain came down without warning. 1 minute the sky was white-gray and heavy, pressing down on the rooftops like a lid. The next, it opened up like someone had turned a faucet on full blast. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the hydrangeas bend under the weight of the water, when I saw Clara running down the sidewalk. No umbrella, no raincoat, clutching a canvas bag full of books against her chest. Her shoes were slapping on the wet pavement, and her hair was already soaked through. I called out to her. She cut across my yard and ran up the porch steps, dripping wet, hair plastered to her face, laughing in that breathless, embarrassed way people laugh when they know they look ridiculous and don't quite care. I reached for the black umbrella on the hook by the door. I held it out to her. She didn't take it. She stood there catching her breath, water dripping from her chin onto the porch boards, and she looked at me, not at the umbrella, not at the rain, and said, "Can you take me home?" Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed, though I didn't catch that at the time. So I did. I opened the umbrella, stepped off the porch into the downpour, and we walked. 3 houses. 3 minutes. Neither of us said a word. Her shoulder brushed against mine under the umbrella, and I could smell rain on her skin mixed with something faint, lavender, maybe, or soap, something clean and warm underneath the cold water. I walked her to her door. She said thank you, and I walked back alone. I didn't think much of it, or I told myself I didn't. Here's what I didn't know then. Clara's house was a 3-minute run from mine. She could have made it home drenched but perfectly fine. She didn't need my umbrella. She didn't need me to walk her. But she needed a reason to stand close to me for longer than the 30 seconds our fence conversations allowed. The umbrella was the excuse. The rain was the permission. "Can you take me home?" was a sentence she'd been turning over in her head for months, waiting for the weather to give her cover. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I was too busy being the man who doesn't notice to notice the one thing that mattered most. After that afternoon, Clara started finding reasons to come by. She needed to borrow a hammer. Hers had a loose head, she said. She wanted my opinion on a paint color for her shutters, holding up 2 swatches that looked identical to me but apparently meant the world to her. She brought over a jar of homemade fig preserves with a handwritten label in her round, careful cursive. Each time she stayed a little longer than the time before. 10 minutes became 30. 30 became an entire afternoon in my workshop, sitting on an old wooden stool with her feet tucked under her, reading a paperback while I worked. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the hand plane, the turn of a page, the lazy creak of the ceiling fan. It was a kind of closeness I'd never had with Dana, the comfort of silence shared, not silence endured. One afternoon, maybe 3 weeks into this routine, Clara picked up the black umbrella. It had been leaning in the corner of the workshop since the rainstorm. She turned it over in her hands, ran her thumb along the curved handle, and said, "You never asked for it back. I didn't look up from the dresser I was sanding. You never gave me a reason to," I said. She smiled a small, quiet smile that I didn't understand at the time, but I understand it now. She kept the umbrella because it was the only thing I'd ever given her without being asked. Not lent, given. And giving it back would have meant admitting the excuse was over. There was a rhythm to it that I started to depend on without realizing it. She'd arrive around 2, usually carrying a book or a thermos of iced tea. She'd settle onto the stool without asking, the way you settle into a seat at a bar you've been going to for years. I'd work. She'd read. Sometimes she'd look up and watch me for a while, and I'd feel her attention on the back of my neck like sunlight through a window, warm and steady. I never turned around to catch her looking. I don't know if that was politeness or cowardice. Maybe both. On hot days, the workshop smelled like wood shavings and varnish and the faintest trace of whatever she'd washed her hair with that morning. On rainy days, the tin roof made conversation impossible, so we'd just sit and let the noise fill the space between us. Those were my favorite days. The rain made the silence feel intentional instead of accidental. My neighbor Ruthie, 70 years old, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who'd buried a husband and raised 4 kids and could read a room from across the street, said something to me one evening while I was watering the hydrangeas. She leaned over her fence, arms crossed, and said, "That girl looks at you like you're the last good thing." I laughed, told her she was reading too many romance novels. Ruthie didn't laugh back. She just shook her head and went inside. She wasn't being dramatic. She was the only person on that street who could see what I was refusing to see, and she knew I wasn't ready to hear it. Clara asked if she could help me restore an oak dining table for a client. I said sure. I showed her how to sand with the grain, how to feel for rough spots with her fingertips, how to let the wood tell you where it needed attention. Her hands were small, careful, deliberate. She treated the wood the way she treated most things, with patience. At one point I reached over and adjusted her grip on the sanding block. My fingers closed over hers, just for a second. It was the first time I'd touched her beyond a handshake. She didn't pull away. I did. I pulled back first, not because I didn't want to, because I had wanted to before, with someone else. And it ended with divorce papers on a kitchen counter. A few days later, Clara opened the wrong drawer looking for sandpaper and found an old wedding photograph, me and Dana, younger, smiling the way people smile when they don't know what's coming. Clara looked at it for a moment. She didn't say a word. She slid the photo back, closed the drawer, and went back to sanding. But the next day she didn't come by. Or the day after. The stool sat empty, and I was surprised by how much I noticed. That stool had been just a stool before Clara started sitting in it. Now it was a question I didn't know how to answer. I went to her house to return a book she'd left on my workbench, a Virginia Woolf novel with a cracked spine and margin notes in pencil. She opened the door with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Bad day at school." I didn't ask what happened. I just said, "I'm making chili tonight. There's too much for one person." She came over. We ate without saying much. Afterward, we sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the frogs in the drainage ditch. The air smelled like wet earth and oak smoke. The hydrangeas were heavy with rain from earlier, their petals curling inward like fists relaxing. After a long silence, Clara said, "You're the only person who doesn't ask me to explain why I'm sad." I said, "Sadness doesn't always need a reason." She didn't respond. She just stayed. And that was more than enough. That's how it went for weeks. Clara in the workshop. Clara on the porch, her jar of preserves on my shelf, her book on my coffee table, the faint smell of her lavender soap on the stool cushion after she left. It was all so gradual that I didn't see it for what it was. Or maybe I did, and I was too scared to name it, because naming it meant risking it, and I knew what risk tasted like. On a Sunday afternoon in late September, I was in the workshop fitting dovetail joints when I heard a car pull into the street, not the usual neighborhood sounds, but something sharper, more deliberate. A BMW, polished black, engine too refined for this part of Savannah. I walked around front, and there she was, Dana. New haircut, sharp and angular, high heels clicking on the gravel driveway. Perfume I could smell from 10 feet away, expensive, heavy, nothing like lavender. Everything about her announced itself. She said she needed to talk. Paperwork about the house we'd shared before the divorce, some final signatures the lawyers had missed. A reasonable excuse, but I knew Dana. Dana didn't drive 4 hours on a Sunday for a signature. She sat at my kitchen table, crossed her legs, looked around the room the way a real estate appraiser surveys a property, measuring everything, filing it. "It's so quiet here," she said. "Don't you get lonely?" I said, "No." She gave me that smile, the one that said she knew me better than I knew myself. "You always said that," she said. "Even when you were." She asked to use the restroom, and I watched her eyes sweep every surface on the way: the bookshelf, the windowsill, the hooks by the door. Dana had always been good at inventorying a room the way other people read a menu, top to bottom, looking for what doesn't belong. When she came back, she sat down and got right to it. The jar of fig preserves on the shelf. I don't keep jam, and never have. The Virginia Woolf on the coffee table, not my taste by a long stretch. The second stool in the workshop, angled toward the workbench like it was meant for company. "Who is she?" she asked, casual as weather. I said, "A neighbor." Dana's smile sharpened into something with edges. "Caleb, you don't keep jam, you don't read Virginia Woolf, and you don't set out a second chair for nobody." And then the worst timing in the world. A knock at the door. Clara, standing on the porch with a plate of lemon bars covered in plastic wrap, the kind she baked when she was in a good mood. The kind that smelled like butter and citrus and a Saturday afternoon with nowhere to be. She stepped inside, her smile already forming, and then she saw Dana at the table. One beat of silence, maybe two. The air in the room changed the way air changes right before a storm. Dana stood up, crossed the room with the easy confidence of someone who used to live in this house, and extended her hand with the widest smile I'd ever seen her wear, the kind of smile that plants a flag. "I'm Dana," she said. "Caleb's ex-wife." She leaned into those last two words, let them land, made sure Clara felt the full weight of history behind them. Clara shook her hand. She was composed, polite, steady. She set the lemon bars on the counter, said, "I'll come back later," and turned toward the door. I watched her walk down the porch steps, her back straight, her pace measured. She didn't look back. Not once. That night, after the lemon bars sat untouched on the counter, and the kitchen filled with the smell of citrus that now felt like evidence of something I'd been too slow to claim, Dana leaned against the doorway with her arms crossed and said, "She likes you. You know that, right?" I didn't answer. Dana kept going, the way she always did when she had a point sharpened and ready. "Be careful with girls like that. Quiet, sweet, always showing up with baked goods, and their hair down. They seem easy, Caleb. Low maintenance. But they want everything. They want the version of you that you couldn't even give me. They want you to be present, and open, and whole, and every other thing you don't know how to be." She paused, and I could feel the next sentence coming the way you feel rain a minute before it hits. "And you'll disappoint her too. You know that. You know it because you've done it before." Dana left the next morning. Drove away in the BMW without much of a goodbye. Just a wave through the tinted window that could have meant anything. But that sentence, "You'll disappoint her too," didn't leave with her. It moved into my house. It unpacked its bags in every corner, every quiet room. It waited for me in the workshop every time I looked at the empty stool, whispering the thing I was most afraid of: "You're not enough. You never were." And wanting something won't change that. I stood in the doorway for a long time after Clara left, my hand still on the screen door. The plate of lemon bars sat on the counter between me and Dana, and neither of us moved to touch them. Dana didn't say anything right away. She was good at that, at letting a moment develop like a photograph in a dark room, waiting until the image was exactly what she wanted before she spoke. She walked over to the plate, peeled back the plastic wrap, and took one. "She bakes, too," Dana said, almost to herself. "Of course she does." She ate it slowly, looking out the window at the hydrangeas, and I had the feeling she was tallying something in her head, adding up all the small, quiet things Clara had left behind in this house, and measuring them against the 6 years she'd spent trying to change me into someone I wasn't. I started pulling away from Clara. Not on purpose, or that's what I told myself. I closed the workshop an hour earlier each day. I stopped sitting on the porch during her morning walk. I found reasons to be inside, to be unavailable, to be somewhere she couldn't find me. And then one morning I opened the front door, and there it was, the umbrella. Clara had left it on my doorstep, folded neatly, with a small note tucked under the handle in her round handwriting. "Thank you for lending it." "See," she gave it back. She was erasing herself from my space, gently, carefully, the way you erase pencil marks from a page you still care about but can't keep writing on. 2 weeks of silence followed. I watched from the workshop window as Clara walked past in the mornings, but she didn't stop at the fence anymore. The hydrangeas were still blooming, heavy and bright, but she didn't glance at them. The stool gathered a thin film of sawdust. Ruthie caught me one afternoon, pretending to check the mailbox, arms crossed over her fence, eyes narrowed like a woman who'd seen this exact kind of foolishness 100 times before, and had no patience left for it. "Whatever you did, fix it," she said. I said, "I didn't do anything." Ruthie looked at me the way only a 70-year-old woman who has buried a husband and raised 4 children can look at a grown man behaving like a coward. "Exactly," she said, and went back inside. Dana didn't break anything between me and Clara. She just turned on the light so I could see the cracks I'd been pretending weren't there. And the cracks weren't about Dana or Clara, they were about me. About the part of me that believed I would always be the man who falls short. The stool in my workshop had never been empty before Clara sat in it. Now it was the emptiest thing in the room. Ruthie called me over on a Wednesday evening to fix a leaky pipe under her kitchen sink. I went because that's what neighbors do, and because Ruthie had a way of asking that didn't leave room for refusal. While I was lying on my back under the sink, staring at corroded copper fittings with a wrench in my hand, Ruthie said casually, "The way you'd mentioned the price of eggs that Clara was moving. The school district had offered her a position in Charleston, better pay, better benefits, closer to her mother. Clara had already accepted." She said, "There's nothing keeping her here," Ruthie added, and even though I couldn't see her face from under the pipe, I could feel her eyes on me like a physical weight, waiting for something to click. I set the wrench down on my chest and lay there for a long moment, listening to the drip I was supposed to be fixing. Then I slid out from under the sink and sat on Ruthie's kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, looking up at her. She had her arms crossed, her expression saying everything her mouth didn't need to. "Well," she said, One word, but it carried the weight of every morning Clara had walked past my fence. Every afternoon she'd sat in my workshop, every excuse she'd invented to be near a man too afraid to meet her halfway. Ruthie didn't say any of that out loud. She just said, "Well," and let me sit with the silence long enough to hear everything I'd been drowning out for weeks: the sound of a stool gathering dust, a fence nobody stopped at, a porch where I sat alone pretending that was what I wanted. That evening, I stood on Clara's front porch. The air was warm and still and smelled like jasmine from the trellis on her railing. I was holding the black umbrella. The sky was perfectly clear, not a cloud, not a drop. Clara opened the door, looked at the umbrella, then looked at my face. "It's not raining, Caleb," she said quietly. I nodded. "I know. I just didn't know what else to bring." She let me in. We sat in her living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and stacks of books wrapped in newspaper. The house already looked like it was letting go of her. I told her everything I should have said weeks ago. About Dana. About the marriage that ended with a handshake. About the sentence that had been eating me alive. "You'll disappoint her too." I told her I was afraid Dana was right, that I was the kind of man who could take a ruined 100-year-old table and make it beautiful but couldn't keep a person close without eventually driving her away. That I pulled back not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much to become the reason she ended up disappointed. Clara was quiet for a long time. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the umbrella I'd placed between us on the couch. Then she spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Dana was wrong about one thing. I don't want a version of you. I want the one that sits in a workshop and doesn't say a word for 3 hours and somehow makes me feel less alone than anyone who's ever tried." Then she told me something that rearranged everything I thought I knew. She hadn't moved here by accident. She knew me through Ruthie. Ruthie was an old friend of her mother's. Ruthie had mentioned the divorced man who lived alone, restored furniture, planted hydrangeas for no reason. Clara came to see for herself. She saw me on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the street like a man who'd made peace with being alone, and she decided to stay. Every morning, walk past the fence intentional, every excuse to borrow a hammer planned, every afternoon in the workshop chosen. "The rain that day," she said, her voice dropping. "I saw the clouds 20 minutes before you did. I could have gone home. I didn't." I looked at the umbrella sitting between us on the couch. I finally understood. It had never been about the rain. Not the walk, not the borrowing, not the preserves on the shelf. It had always been about finding a way to be near someone she'd already chosen, hoping he'd eventually choose her back. I sat there letting her words settle over me like rain. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me, not Dana, not anyone. Dana had loved the idea of who I could become. Clara loved who I already was. There's a difference between those two things that I didn't fully understand until that moment. Sitting in a half-packed living room with a black umbrella between us and 3 years of excuses finally running dry, I felt something crack open in my chest, not dramatically, not like in the movies. More like a window that had been painted shut for years finally giving way. Air rushed in, and with it, the terrifying, unmistakable understanding that I was going to have to choose between the safety of being alone and the risk of being known. I said, "Don't go to Charleston." Clara met my eyes. "Give me a reason." I didn't answer with words. I picked up the umbrella and placed it in her hands, folding her fingers around the handle. "Keep it," I said. "I don't need a reason to come find you anymore." I'd spent 2 years not seeing what was right in front of me. Not because it was hidden, because I was afraid of what it meant if I saw it. Seeing it meant wanting something again. Wanting meant I could lose it. But standing in Clara's half-packed living room, I realized not wanting was its own kind of losing, the slower kind, the kind you don't notice until you're sitting alone in a workshop, wondering why the silence sounds different than it used to. Clara didn't move to Charleston. I didn't ask her to explain, and she didn't offer an explanation. We didn't kiss that night, didn't make declarations, didn't define what we were. She came back to the workshop the next afternoon. The stool had someone sitting in it again. But something had shifted, something quiet and fundamental, like a house settling deeper into its foundation after a long rain. I didn't pull my hand away when it brushed hers, reaching for the same piece of sandpaper. She didn't invent excuses to stay. She stayed because she wanted to, and for the first time, we both knew it. I made chili. She brought a bottle of red wine. We sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the frogs, and neither of us asked, "What are we?" We didn't need to. Whatever this was, it had been happening for longer than either of us had been brave enough to say out loud. 3 months later, Clara had a key to my house, not because I handed it to her in some romantic gesture, but because I was carrying a slab of walnut through the back door and my hands were full, sawdust in my eyes, and I said, "Grab the key from my shirt pocket and let us in." She fished it out, unlocked the door, and slipped the key into her own pocket, without thinking about it twice. She never gave it back. I never asked for it. I liked that it was there in her pocket, on her keyring, part of the quiet architecture of a life we were building without blueprints. Some things don't need a ceremony. They just need a moment ordinary enough to feel true. 6 months after that, Clara's belongings started appearing around my house like evidence of a life quietly merging with mine. A toothbrush in the bathroom cup next to mine, a small bookshelf installed beside the workshop door, filled with novels I'd never read but liked having around, her house slippers sitting next to my work boots by the entrance, hers soft and worn, mine heavy and scuffed. Nobody ever said, "Move in with me." It happened the way seasons change slowly, imperceptibly, and then one morning you look around and everything is different, and you can't point to the day it shifted. I liked it that way. So did she. We'd both had enough of grand declarations that didn't hold their weight. A year in, Dana called. Her voice was different on the phone, softer, the sharp edges filed down by time, and whatever she'd built on the other side of our marriage. She said she'd met someone, a contractor from Macon who liked to talk as much as she did. I told her I was glad, and I meant it without reservation. There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries something it doesn't know how to say, and then Dana spoke. "I was wrong about what I said that day, about you disappointing her," I said. "I know." Not with arrogance, just with the quiet certainty of a man who'd finally stopped believing the worst about himself. Dana laughed, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, it was a laugh that had nothing to prove. "I can tell you the exact moment I knew I loved Clara. It wasn't a conversation or a grand gesture or some cinematic revelation. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring. I came downstairs earlier than usual, expecting an empty kitchen and a cold coffee pot, and found that Clara had already made coffee black, no sugar, exactly the way I drink it, learned without her ever asking me once how I took it. She was sitting on the porch with a book in her lap, the morning light coming through the hydrangeas and falling on her shoulders in blue-green shadows, and she didn't know I was watching from the doorway. She looked like she belonged to the house, like the house had been waiting for her the same way I had, without knowing what it was waiting for. The black umbrella hung on its hook by the front door, right next to a pale blue umbrella that Clara had brought from her place. 2 umbrellas, side by side, one black and one blue. I never said out loud what that image meant to me, but every time I walked past them on my way to the workshop, something settled in my chest, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. Some things don't need to be spoken, they just need to be seen by someone willing to look. There were 100 small moments like that in the months that followed. The way she'd leave a bookmark in whatever she was reading so I could find it and read the passage she'd underlined, her way of having a conversation without speaking. The way she started keeping a sweater on the hook next to my jacket by the workshop door, as if her warmth and mine could keep each other company even when we weren't there. The way she'd fall asleep on the couch on Saturday nights while I was finishing a piece, and I'd cover her with a blanket and keep working, and the sound of her breathing became part of the workshop the same way the ceiling fan and the hand plane were. She wove herself into my life so gently that I never felt the thread pulling tight. It just held. 2 years after that night in Clara's living room, I proposed. Not with a ring, I didn't have one yet. I was in the workshop building a small box, dovetail joints, cherry wood, lined with dark blue felt. Clara wandered in, sat on her stool, watched me work for a while with her chin resting on her knee, and asked, "Who's the box for?" I said, without looking up, "For the ring I haven't bought yet." Silence. I felt her eyes on me. "Is that your way of asking?" she said. I looked up. "Is that your way of saying yes?" She laughed, that full, unguarded laugh I'd learned was worth more than anything she could put into words. That was enough. With Clara, it was always enough. We got married on the front porch on a Saturday afternoon in June. Small ceremony, just us. Ruthie standing between us with a grin she couldn't contain, and a few neighbors who wandered over when they saw the flowers. And the rain came, because Savannah in June doesn't know how to behave. I reached for the black umbrella instinct, the same gesture I'd made on that first afternoon. Clara put her hand over mine and pushed the umbrella back down. She looked up at the sky and let the rain land on her face. "I don't need it anymore," she said. "I'm already home." It's been 3 years now since that first rainstorm. I'm in the workshop this evening, running a hand plane along a piece of maple for a new dining table. Clara is on the stool, her stool feet tucked under her, reading something thick and dog-eared. The ceiling fan turns slow. The air smells like sawdust and varnish and the coffee she brewed this morning. The black umbrella still hangs on the hook by the front door, next to the blue one. We don't need them tonight, but I will never take that umbrella down. People think love starts with a big moment, a lightning strike, a racing heart, some cinematic revelation. Mine started with a black umbrella in a rainstorm, and a woman who didn't need anyone to walk her home but chose to stand under my umbrella anyway. I used to think living alone was peace. I was right, but peace with someone beside you, someone who's quiet with you, who doesn't ask you to be different, who reads in your workshop and leaves her slippers next to your boots, that's the thing I didn't know I was missing. So if you're sitting on a porch somewhere, holding an umbrella you don't need, waiting for the rain to give you a reason, maybe stop waiting. Maybe just walk over. Maybe she's been hoping you would. Have you ever had someone right next to you, no rain, no excuse needed, and still couldn't see them? If you were Clara, would you have waited 2 years? If this story reached you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, are you Caleb or Clara? The one who couldn't see, or the one who kept waiting? Hit the bell so you don't miss the next story.